Ahmed, as always, lovely to see you this morning. Thank you.
Hey.
It's 7:39 here on BBC Breakfast. Living and working in Australia is a dream for many young Brits, but the mandatory stint of farm work, which comes with the visa, has sometimes led to dangerous situations.
Yes, tragically, that was the case for Mia Ayliffe Chung and Tom Jackson, who 5 years ago were murdered while working in rural Queensland.
Well, now, in the new trade deal, the UK and Australian governments have agreed to scrap the agricultural work requirement. And Mia's mother, Rosie, who has long campaigned for a change to the rules, joins us now. Morning, Rosie. I know, as we've said, that you've been working on this for so long, but tell us how you became aware that this obligation to work in these kinds of environments was such an issue for young travellers in Australia.
My daughter told me that she was going to do her farm work and that she was obliged to do it. And that was really the first I'd heard about the scheme. But when she arrived in the hostel and started telling me about the conditions she was working in, I started to be alarmed back then because she was talking about a lack of regulation. She was talking about a lack of induction. And she was talking about the dangers in the field that she experienced. And as time progressed, I mean, she was only in that hostel for a few days, I started to realise that she was afraid. I didn't know what she was frightened of, but I later found that she was put into a room with a guy who was presenting with mental health issues and was evidently obsessed with her. And she asked to move rooms and was not given permission. And she was murdered. You know, one night she was dragged out of her bed and killed. And Tom Jackson tried to save her life, and very bravely. And Daniel Richards stayed with her while she died. And Tom's life was taken that night too. So it was apparent to me before she died that there were issues.
And then you went to Australia, and I think you went to some of these areas and spoke to young people living and working in these kinds of environments, and it really opened up your eyes even more to what was going on.
I met young people who were traumatised because of the abuse they'd experienced. I met young people who'd suffered sexual attacks. I met young people who had worked on way below the minimum wage, and that in itself had put them at risk. I met people who were put out on a road in the middle of the outback at 3 o'clock in the morning with all their belongings just tipped literally onto the road. And, you know, the risks out there, I mean, Australia had its fair share of serial killers. So just to do that in itself was incredible to me, that these often, not necessarily farmers, but labour contract hirers or hostel owners could treat young, vulnerable people from a different culture in the way they were doing was a shock.
You became then totally committed to getting this changed. How does it feel to know that other young Brits now travelling to Australia won't face the same obligations?
I'm relieved, but I'm very well aware that this is just the first step, because from an international perspective, there will be other Europeans and Asians and Pacific Islanders to take their place, and the imbalance in power between the farmer or the employer and the worker, the migrant worker, is still there because the 88 days still exists for other nationalities. So while I feel, you know, internally grateful to Boris Johnson for bringing our people out, that now needs to be replicated by other world leaders.
I know Tom Jackson's family are incredibly supportive of your campaign as well, but just tell us, I can only imagine that for the last 5 years there hasn't been a day, an hour, a moment when Mia hasn't been in your mind. How has that been for you? How have you managed through the last 5 years?
I think in terms of grief, they say that constantly facing your demons and constantly being able to talk through those last moments, your emotions, and the loss is vital. And to be honest, that is what I've been able to do through campaigning and through writing a book about the subject. I've revisited the grief, and that has been my therapy. So in a sense, you are my therapist. I talk to journalists all the time, and they make me face that event. So that has been incredible for me, and now I'm now in a place I never thought I would reach, where we're running a business. I live in this beautiful place, and I have found a kind of happiness. But like you say, Mia is always with me, and the loss is always there. It's not something you get over. You assimilate it as part of who you become.
Well, it's an extraordinary work that you have done in this area that many, many young British people will benefit from. And thank you so much for talking to us and telling us about it.
Thank you.
That's Rosie Ayliffe, mother of Mia, who was killed 5 years ago.
Is it making a difference, particularly in the Northwest, for example, football stadia being opened up to allow people just to turn up if they're eligible? Is that approach working?
Yes. So we know when we look at the people who get poorly and end up in hospital, if you look at them, most of them haven't had any of their jabs, or they've not, had the second one. So if we can get everybody to get your jab, so if you're due for it, if you've been called for it, if you know about it, and you're one of the people eligible for it, go and get your jab. We know it's the best protection we have, not just for you, but for the people you love and you'll be in contact with, and for all of us. To
discuss it a little more is regular GP, Dr. Fari Ahmed. Good morning to you. So let's talk about, first of all, that third wave. Are you seeing evidence of a third wave in your surgery?
Yes, so I think we have been for at least the past 2-3 weeks. We've seen more cases, and we're seeing younger people having symptoms and a diagnosis of coronavirus.
And so we now know, as you've touched on, that all over 18s can now book their appointment to get their jab. We still talk about vaccine hesitancy, don't we?
Who are happy to take it up, because I think the understanding is the jab is you're safer with the jab than having COVID. So that's good. There are still some people who have questions, and I think myself and lots of my colleagues all over the country are spending a lot of time talking to people about their risks and encouraging them to go ahead and have the vaccination, because it's
useful to have clear, concise advice. So thank you, Dr. Fari Ahmed. As always, lovely to see you this morning. Thank you.
Okay.
A moment when Mia hasn't been in your mind. How has that been for you? How have you managed through the last 5 years?
I think in terms of grief, they say that constantly facing your demons and constantly being able to talk through those last moments, your emotions, and the loss is vital. And to be honest, that is what I've been able to do through campaigning and through writing a book about the subject. I've revisited the grief, and that has been my therapy. So in a sense, you are my therapist. I talk to journalists all the time, and they make me face that event. So that has been incredible for me. And now, like you say, Mia is always with me, and the loss is always there. It's not something you get over. You assimilate it as part of who you become.
Well, it's an extraordinary work that you have done in this area that many, many young British people will benefit from. And thank you so much for talking to us and telling us about it.
Thank you.
That's Rosie Ayliffe, mother of Mia, who was killed 5 years ago.
Let's have a look at what the weather is doing. Louise has all the details for us. Louise, good morning.
Good morning. It's Father's Day, in case you've forgotten. Just a quick nudge to remind you.